Check one, two. Check one, two. Check one, two.
There's a lot of check one twos going on.
We hear you loud and clear. Check one, two. Check one, two.
We hear you.
Thank you. I'm doing checks for our control room also. I'll be done in just a second. Check one, two. Check one, two.
And
Check
we're
one,
a
two.
go.
Like all of us actually. I get posted every now and then. What's the name called? I mean, it's called like CTDOT, maybe official. It's not very good. It's just not. It's not. I don't think it's not like the worst ever. Yeah. I think I don't know. Like searching for a connection there, Paul.
Brett Meskers, I also wanted to announce to the group that there were tech difficulties during last meeting because there was an outage with Outlook, and that was a lot of the reason behind links that weren't working and all of that good stuff.
Okay. We're comfortable. We're in a good position now. I'm just going to wait a couple of, I've got 10:03, limits wait another 2 minutes. I think we've got pretty much everybody on board.
No, he got full.
And Patricia, where did we set up for the agenda today? What are the items to cover, just so we keep on target, on board?
Priority today is identifying and prioritizing recommendations.
Okay.
I have a few people that have logged in that I don't have announced. So if I could hear from Jay Lacar. If you can identify who you're here with or for.
Josh Lacar, I'm here representing Connecticut DOT.
DOT, okay. I have a Pam Sakato also with DOT.
If it is Pam, I know her well from DOT. So.
Okay.
Yes, that is me.
All right, I just want to have everybody on record. Thank you. And Taylor Thorpe, if you could identify yourself and your affiliation, that'd be great. Thanks so much, everybody.
I am here on behalf of Commissioner Boughton.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure. Do we have my co-chair?
I have not seen her sign in yet, but we have Rob Hodeling from DECD in person today.
Ah, Rob, welcome. Rob, we had some conversations yesterday. Maybe we could start by summarizing what the conversations were we had ancillary to the group, so we can bring the group up to speed on the conversation. I think we had mostly members of the group, but I want to get everybody involved at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Rep Meskers, and thank you, or I should say Chair Meskers, apologies. So yesterday we, at the initiative of Representative Baumgardner, we put together a very quick meeting about where potentially Mystic Tourism Committee in its resiliency considerations meet I'm going to say this as slowly as I can, the Connecticut Insurance Department, its commissioner, Commissioner Mays. He put together an extreme weather mitigation and resiliency advisory council, aka EWMRAC. So that group convened to put together experts from insurance, from home builders, from Red Cross, circa, in order to look at how we could help essentially homeowners and small businesses deal with extreme weather events. How do you mitigate before a storm, and how do you bounce back better, which is the resiliency efforts after the storm. We thought that there was some overlap, a significant amount of overlap in terms of resiliency considerations and strategy, and maybe potentially looking at an incentive program, which is really the intention here, that Mystic could also benefit from. So really, coming out of that meeting, we discussed a number of topics and issues. At a high level, there are certain, and we understand this well, Chair Meskers, to separate resiliency as a consideration from, say, the other subcommittees of Mystic Tourism, which would include traffic, tourism, sort of the economics of the area. And so what we decided to do would be to share information. And we're also in a listening mode right now, listening and learning mode. So again, I do want to just plug in that we'll have a public meeting on December 18th right here in the LOB. And so all are welcome. But again, the goal would be to do some information share in a listening and learning mode so that we could potentially feed back into Mystic Tourism's issues with wind and water, specifically flood. So thank you, Chair Meskers.
Okay. So if I could ask, it would be helpful going forward on those questions of resiliency. I think important to all of us in economic development is obviously resiliency. In economic development, it's working with both the insurance department and the insurance industry to see that measures we make to improve the tourist experience and tourism and the economic development, that we encompass or encourage those recommendations. And probably moving outside of our own purview into insurance, those issues, when you begin to work forward with those suggestions, recommendations, that we get some, I guess, buy-in, as it were, from the insurance industry, things that will help alleviate what are the ongoing concerns about mitigation leading to a reduction in insurance premiums, or slowing the growth of insurance premiums, that we're building a happier and healthier environment on the resiliency side. There'll be some concern or purview from our side of getting accomplishing something there that will lead us to sustainable development, right? And affordable development in the tourism exercise we're engaged in here. So any suggestions after the 18th or recommendations of key points you think are important, I would suggest probably coordinated with, particularly with Danielle Cheeseborough and John Burt as the two elected officials, local officials, on the priority list for the resiliency, that we begin to think about what are those priorities on the resiliency per se. Right? So any help you can give us there would be very good. So I want to convene the meeting in general now that we've kind of brought up what happened there. I'm anticipating today's meeting, and I'm proposing a meeting for the 18th. And since we start session January 8th, I'm hoping that we figure out and get to a draft report, obviously to circulate among some of the members, to get to a list of priorities that we set forth for the group, right? We've had long conversations about various aspects of the issue. I'm going to rely at some point as well on the Department of Transportation. We need to have some conversations related to dealing with parking, the infrastructure for tourism in the area. You know, what proposed solutions? Is there a possibility, and whether I'd have to take that back through OLR or ask the DOT, are there programs that we might be able to tap into in relation to support for both infrastructure in relation to parking structures potentially, and or shuttles to deal with the traffic and tourism in the area? And again, back through the elected officials being Danielle and John, figure out what the levels of priorities and proposals are. We've had long-ranging conversations. They've been broad in nature and scope, but I think what we need to drive to are particular proposals or suggestions that we can look at to follow through in the course of the session to see whether we can tap into resources to do something to deal with the issues of tourism, infrastructure, and resiliency. I mean, in summary, that's what I'm hoping we can get to. What I've heard from various members are parking as it relates to tourists, parking as it relates to the workforce, and parking as it relates to residents, and some easing of those burdens and figuring out what we can do on-site and off-site. I will look for suggestions from the group or from individuals within the group about, and the DOT, about potential siting of any parking and parking sites, parking locations. That would be very helpful. There are 2 or 3 large players in the group that have properties. I don't know if the DOT really has much in the way of properties. That'll be a question I think we've explored to a certain extent. Are there opportunities or places for off-site parking that is within a walking distance that creates the experience that we're looking for to foster and enhance? And what's the nature of the consideration from the DOT or from the state or from the federal delegation about what kinds of sources or funding is available? As we come through this, I think whether we get to the final recommendations or follow through into a public hearing next session in Commerce, we need to come back with hard and fast requests or asks that are reasonable and achievable in both the short term, medium term, and long term. When I sit back, just, I don't want to be the orchestra leader, but I guess I am trying to be the orchestra leader. We've got potential short term and quick fixes, hopefully. We've got medium term fixes and long term fixes, and those relate to everything from the parking issues, the coastal, the resiliency, and enhancing the experience and the infrastructure. And I'll be looking for some guidance on that. I don't know, Senator Hartley, any thoughts or comments from you? Catching you up.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. No, I think you summed it all up. And as you so aptly point out, we'll be looking to have a report so that the Commerce Committee can then open it up for public hearing, and then we will begin our work. And depending upon what is in those recommendations, we will then be better advised as to what our capability and ability is within the framework of obviously the biennium, which is the first year of the budget. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Bruce, given your background on the chamber, et cetera, you have any thoughts initially you'd like to share with us right now? Not to put you on the spot, but just.
No, I think that the discussions that are going on are helpful, and I think that the parking situation in Mystic is a very difficult one, and I think there's so many interested people in terms of what's been trying to be done in terms like the studies that have been done, the recommendations that have been made, and how the town's people have responded to them. So from the parking situation side, I think it's very hard to come up with something that's going to please everybody. With respect to downtown as a whole, it's part of the challenges are continuing to put on these big events down here that are and having the costs associated with them that are growing, and I don't think that's something that this committee can help with, at least in the short term.
No, that's been mentioned in our group, and I mentioned it, so I'll bring that back up to our, because, see our clerk furiously scribbling there. The issues on support of economic development, with essentially most of the economic activity revenue going to the state, will be a question at some point, but that's going to be a question of, is there a possibility, and that's going to be back through TRS, Boughton, governor, et cetera, about any kind of a taxing authority. And the question there on economic development is it's a long and difficult and fraught conversation about creating the right structure that ensures that if there's targeted revenue, that it goes to the right place, that it does actually work for economic development and doesn't become supplanted for either operating revenue for the mills, et cetera. I think it's a fraught conversation that we may have to refer that to OLR about any studies of taxing jurisdictions potentially, because I think that's a longer term conversation that we're not going to get to in this conversations or in this committee. So I appreciate that. But that's probably worthwhile for Commerce to look at, tourism taxing authorities, et cetera.
If I may, Representative, I do have a bill in on that I'm going to be putting in that I will share with you after this meeting.
Okay, and that's probably going to end up in bonding or finance.
I think finance, probably in finance.
Okay, right. And the question of the depth of that'll be interesting, because my concern on those just is that they are targeted, dedicated, and don't get diverted, and that the people who raise those, that's the groups that support the taxes, that they're dedicated to the resources to get what you want to accomplish. That's always the bugaboo across the country, not necessarily in your bill.
I think this would be it's a little different take, and I'm happy to share with you what it is after the meeting.
Good. I'd like to bring in Peter. You've sat through a lot of the conversations. You have, I think you've been a good voice of reason. You want to share any of your thoughts at this moment on this in relation to back on the issue of traffic, parking, et cetera? Any thought that as one of the major tourist destinations?
Yeah, I spoke to Chaz Frost from Frost and Knight, who is kind of an architectural landscape. He doesn't work for us, but he does a lot of work for the city, for the town as well. Just about what plans had been in the past and how those plans had either disappeared or what made sense and what didn't make sense. So I've been talking with him because I know he also talks with Susan at the Mystic Arts as well, about what the solutions have been in the past and what they could be going forward in the future. And, this idea about a parking garage in one of our sites, either the southern parking lot or the northern parking lot, has been booted around for a long period of time. So we would want to continue that thinking. We know that we've done some work already that talks about the fact that if you parked in our southern parking lot and you walked into Mystic, it would take 11 minutes. And we have a walking route that we would propose as well, where we'd put some pavements in that would allow people. And part of that is also you mentioned at the very beginning that it's also about the businesses as well. So the idea that the businesses could park in that spot, we could shuttle them in early in the morning so it didn't take up spaces in downtown as such, hopefully relieving some of those spaces as well. So it's all just about relieving the number of parking spots in downtown and trying to persuade people to park there and either walk in or shuttle in. And as I said at the very beginning, the difficulty is you're trying to change a mindset. And the mindset is you drive in and you want to go and visit somewhere in the middle of the town at a shop, and you're hoping that there's a space right in front of that shop. That's what everybody already thinks. So it's trying to really divert people to realize that's not a good option, and the best option is to go into that parking lot. So we've already pushed that. We've already pushed the fact about potentially a water taxi, although the numbers of that will never be huge, but there will be some relief in the summer, I think. And so at the moment I'm working with Chad to try and put something that visually shows how that might work. Okay,
it would be good if you could put something together with your suggestions on that for I think our next meeting we're planning on the 18th.
Yeah, I will have something. I've talked to Chad about 2 weeks ago. We already have these drawings. We look back over the last 25 years about what master plans have been done and drawings have been done and ideas that are done, and really it's just taking them and simplifying them down to some clear objectives that we feel would be appropriate for the town. And that's the parking. The other thing I kind of drum I've been banging is just making sure that our product of Mystic is and the area is good enough to the visits. I have a great concern, and I've expressed this to Bruce and some other people, that that we're encouraging people to come to the town of Mystic because it's the fourth best in the US, and it's a beautiful town, and it's in a jewel of the east of New England. But what have we got downtown that actually, when they get there, we really need to start thinking about what that actually means, because the moment is really just a retail and an eating options. And for people that are downtown, when there's got hundreds of people, thousands of people walking around downtown, it's pretty soon that those things fill up. So we need to consider what else we can be doing.
Right, that may be questions for us to work on with you and with John and with Danielle Cheeseborough to figure out what we can get to. Thanks, Peter. I'll wait for that and if you get it done to get it through the clerk, we'll circulate it to have it for the conversation for the next meeting.
Sure.
Commissioner Bowden has his hand raised. I don't want to avoid or not give him due credit. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts, Representative. So I think we've got some ideas, as Peter's mentioned. We simplified sort of like what our concepts are, I guess, because we're a working group, so that's probably the best way to do it. I think it would behoove us, just a suggestion, don't everybody boo me at once, but it would behoove us if we requested, as part of our recommendation, that we bring in a consultant that will help us tie all this together. And they can work with our federal funds team. Rob Hodling is here, as well as Taylor and Ryan Hughes. They can provide some horsepower to pull a playbook together, if you will, of things that need to get done in that general area. That would simply just, play one, play two, and like you had mentioned, break them down by low-hanging fruit, and then stuff that's sort of mid-range and then long-range kind of things. But I think particularly with the transportation stuff, it would be really important to be able to find somebody that would be able to work with DOT a little bit, and within the context of the things that they're going to do, as we saw on their presentation, be able to pull out some of the stuff that we will need to make this work for us. The only other thing I just want to mention to everybody's food for thought, I don't like to be the skunk at the garden party, but there is going to be a change in administrations. The entire BIL CHIPS, as well as the IRA program, all those are under review. We're not sure where any of this stuff is going to land in terms of federal dollars. So we'll need to be flexible. We'll need to be agile, and we may have to reframe things as we get more clarity on what the new administration wants to prioritize versus what the old one has done. I did have some preliminary meetings with some folks from down there. Explained this is more of a 50,000 foot thing, the benefit of our current approach nationally to infrastructure, and we're really about 18 months away from seeing cranes pretty much all over the country. So I think roads, bridges, things like that are safe. I think anything that's got the word green attached to it is probably going to be a challenge to keep funded. And any dollars that haven't been spent, they're going to go back and try to reclaim them or claw back. So those are just some things to keep in mind as we move forward with this. And that's why I think bringing in somebody that could probably put everything together, and that would be a very modest ask, I think, of the governor and the General Assembly versus, well, we want $50 million for a parking deck. Well, we want to make sure we know what size, where should it go, how big should it be? Do we need, or maybe we can just get away with surface or all different kinds of ideas. And there are people out there that can do that work fairly inexpensively, work with our team to put together a comprehensive report for the working group. And then we can go forward and see what dollars we can leverage and go from there. So there's just a couple of thoughts, a little bit scattered, I get it, but happy to assist in doing all that for the team.
Yeah, that's a very helpful suggestion. I think we'll have to take that under consideration. Do we need funding for a consultant to tie this all together from the various players at the table today with us? And that's related to coastal resiliency, which goes, whether it's green or just it's sustaining the environmental issues there, or is it on the parking, and where, and is there sources of funding, and how we plan for that? Hopefully, that type of a consultant's job is not something that's going to go past. I would think, can we string something together in 3 months or 4 months, or what's a time frame that's logical? And how long is it to secure funding for that? Right. And
Yeah,
whether
I mean, I agree. Yeah, I think that'll be the challenge, but I think it really would be a good approach. I've done this in another project similar to this. And what we would do in our recommendation to the General Assembly is we would list out the things that we think need to get done, things that Peter already talked about. Then I'll say, okay, now instead of asking for, like I said, a huge ask that everybody's going to fall off their chair, we just say, well, we really want to pull this together, prioritize it, and put it in a comprehensive playbook that the legislature can knock out one at a time, not just over one session, but over multiple sessions, to try to get to the end game of providing a better experience for everybody. And for that, I'll shut up.
that'd be good if you put those thoughts to us in paper as well. That would be helpful for our next
Okay.
meeting. Discuss
Yep.
them thoroughly. I think the only thing I would add to that is, if we engage a consultant and we get to a program, then the question is, how is the program either housed or monitored? Does it become the purview of the Commerce Committee? Does it become the purview of a developmental group or an agency of the government that is current? Like, who's going to pick it up and carry it forward once we've finished our conclusions or get a consultant's report that we all endorse? Who becomes the agent to make sure that it doesn't become something that's a beautiful program that gets put on the shelf and gets enacted, right? We've got to have ongoing, consistent advocacy work. And, I'm not saying that we aren't willing to at Commerce, but the question is, what's the standing group going to look like? We'll have to think about that.
Good. Understood.
That might be helpful. And given your role in DRS, that takes us back to either private-public partnerships, et cetera. What is being done away from us? I know you'd mentioned a couple of groups in the past in relation to various development groups, private-public, that have developed tourist spots across the country.
Yeah, absolutely.
That might dovetail into what Heather had mentioned, Senator Summers had mentioned in relation to the potential for a taxing authority as well. We want to make sure that things are focused in the right way, that we're doing it all to get the right impetus for this, for an ongoing resolution. I'm hopeful. I think that's part of. I dovetail between the issue of trying to get something accomplished in the short term and trying to build a model that's going to work for a more longer term for this area and then other areas that when we identify the needs. So that's important. Next on, anyone else have a comment or thought? Chris Reagan, you've got your hand raised.
Thank you. So I have a couple things that I think it's great to try to get a consultant to help us. I think that's probably the next step for us, is to determine how many parking spaces are needed within each area, downtown, near the seaport, near the aquarium, in the village. Is it multiple parking structures possibly that are not overly big in different areas? Is there the willingness to buy a property and then put a parking structure on? I have a location that I can't disclose right now, but that's within walking distance of downtown, that could possibly have 600 to 1,000 parking spaces, but the property would have to be purchased. So that would be something that would solve a lot of the problems, because it would not be located within an area that gets flooded. So it's easy access too. That's one option. And then, I think more of making sure we do upgrades on walkability to all the different attractions, to downtown, to the seaport, to the aquarium, down along Route 27, I think is definitely something that we need to put into our agenda. The other thing is, I'd like to see if you can get the new chair of the airport authority to come and speak to us about what could happen at Groton, in the London airport. I think that's another cog in the wheel that we haven't really delved into. And I think as a new commissioner, I think he'd be more willing to listen to what our concerns, and hopefully we can move that needle to get more commercial flights in our area. And that's all I have.
Okay. For this committee, I would tell you that I think the issues on the parking resonate, and we'll have to take that under consideration. I think the airport authority of those plans probably are a little bit bigger of a nut to digest within the scope of what we're trying to accomplish short term.
Yep.
But it certainly might be worthwhile of us to consider under commerce to talk about what their regional development plans are for the airport authority. But I wouldn't rush on that one. I don't think at this late date I'm willing to bring that to the forefront. But the other issues I think are more than valid for us. Rachel, I see your hand raised. I think you're muted still. There you go.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Rep. Meskers. So something I wanted to mention was, looking at the events and things that are going on in downtown Mystic, in and around Biscule Bridge. I think Bruce Flack has done, and his team has done an incredible job of putting together these monumental major events, like the lighted boat parade. Bruce, I'd be interested to know how many people attended this past Saturday at that lighted boat parade. I mean, I'm sure it was astronomical.
In excess of 20,000.
That's a lot of bodies. That's a lot of bodies in a very little area. And I'm sure that Chief Fasaro and the police chief of Stonington would also, I would imagine, have comments about just the public safety aspect of having that many people in one area. And I know that there has been a struggle for support for Bruce and his events because of the lack of resources as far as keeping everybody safe and, being able to actually execute these events. And going back to what Peter Armstrong said about there being more in downtown Mystic than just shops and eateries, which I think are an incredible driver and what makes Mystic so magical. I also think that these events are a massive driver and should have consideration in the plan as far as making sure that there is ample infrastructure support of whether it be public safety or, sanitation or whatever it might be, so that these events can continue to happen and make incredible memories with people coming into Connecticut. I mean, there's the lighted boat parade is an institution. And if we're not able to have ample resources for those events that are getting wildly popular to keep going, I think that's going to put a big impact on the sentiment and the experience of going into Mystic, around Christmas time, or, the summer events like the Mystic Outdoor Art Festival. These things are huge drivers. And not only that, but have gained national press on the just the great overall experience of it. So just some things to really consider as the plan is being built. I know that infrastructure is really important with parking, but I also think human capital and support for sanitation and public safety is also equally important so that these can continue to happen. Thank you.
Okay. I'm not thrilled with the commentary, Rachel, because it's just another more wood for the fire, but I think it's valid. So
It's important.
but it hasn't, it's been mentioned not directly, but indirectly. It's been mentioned by many of the players in our group here. So I appreciate that. That probably is an additional charge that I haven't thrown at the group. And I don't know whether I want to defer and ask support from the COG, but there needs to be, for those, it's almost an ancillary piece of business we need to deal with. One is the day-to-day workers, tourists, and residents, and the parking and the structure and the support of the normal tourist activities. I think the question becomes the regional planning for larger events and how well we've coordinated that, or have we in the past. And I would defer at some level to the COGS about what parking resources and what those become sporadic transport issues. Do we have availability at the tribal nations in parking? Are the events planned around or balancing the demands for the parking and resources at the casinos, et cetera? Are there opportunities there? We'd have to look at that. But I think you're right. I think that might be a second piece. I'll alert my clerk. Is the question is, how do we handle seasonal demand for particular seasonal activity? Because that is a concern. Because experientially, if that's bad, it dribbles or drains into. I've been to Mystic. It was not a pleasant experience in terms of that big event. So I don't think we haven't mentioned it or highlighted it that way. You know, Peter, you probably made reference to it. I probably haven't picked up and commented enough. I think that's another piece to look at is how do we handle, and that may be part of, if we go the route of a consultant, go back to, I'll get repetitive because I'm trying to drive to some solutions. It's residents, tourists, residents, tourists, and events in terms of parking. How well can we handle? Because those one-time events, we're not building parking for 20,000 people. Unless we build a stadium for 20,000 people, we're not going to build the capacity to be able to handle 20,000 every weekend if we have 20,000 for 3 events. But the question is, how do we stage those events? And on the revenue side, how do we capture revenue to support those events? Those are valid concerns. Kate, I see you.
I would just, just to add to that, I think that New London is a resource there because of how they manage SailFest annually and have been doing so for so many years. In terms of utilizing other resources, for example, I know that some of the police officers from other communities are utilized during those busy weekends to, balance, deal with crowd control. We've also had some experience with SEAT. SEAT can be utilized to provide additional trips. There are some limitations within the regulatory framework that they work under for adding additional trips. But I think that, that those would be 2 areas where I think that it makes sense to try and look at how we deal with regional events and utilizing some assets around the region.
Thank you. Bruce.
Thank you. Just very quickly, because we did have the lighted boat parade on Saturday. In 2021, the cost for police on both sides of the town for us was 0. And this year it will be in excess of $17,000. It has become a huge event for us and for the region. And there are people who are they plan their weekends around it now. We also had it broadcast on CBS on Channel 3 sister station. So it's being open to a larger audience for people who want to come. So any discussion that centers around not just events in Mystic, but anywhere that draw these large crowds to help with the resources, because the towns do give a lot. Stonington and Groton help us in many ways. But on the police side of things, there's police that have to come out, and so we have to pay for them. And we want the areas to be safe for everybody. But in terms of what the events bring to the region and the support that we get on other sides, it's great for us to be able to talk about. And I appreciate Rachel bringing up as well. And also working together from the Seaport side, we wouldn't be able to do it with some of our partners like the Seaport, because they're helping us do the boats and get everybody lined up. And of course, the boaters that partake, we'd have no parade without them. So I just appreciate the discussion around the events, and it's just very timely for us because it just happened on Saturday.
No, that's helpful. Maybe a summary of both the obstacles and the opportunities you see there. Maybe both you and Kate, if you'd work together on that, talking about what's gone on with events, what kind of support we might need going forward, what you see. Be good for the 2 of you to come back with some thoughts on that. And then, we may have to go with whatever your suggestions are. We may have to go back through research and OLR, et cetera, see structurally what's done across the country for those events that are region-wide, and what kind of support structure we need, or what standing group to be able to plan those events, and where the resources might be available to plan those events, to host them and make them successful. Because it sounds like, Bruce, just as a quick, without getting deep in the weeds, so before it was free and now it's 17,000?
The police costs, yes, before they were free, and now they're 17,000. And we know the crowds have grown, so it's not indicative of the Facebook interest, but the Facebook interest has grown from 18,000 2 years ago to 85,000 this year. It didn't translate to that percentage increase in the people who came, but we're getting seen more and more. So and it's very difficult for us to when we're getting sponsors for the events. It's a nighttime event, and so we're trying to find good ways to get people's names out there. And I talked about it before. If we can work with DOT on some of the banners that we're allowed to put up in town on this, over the sidewalks, that would help us be able to generate that revenue and not have to rely on others to get it. But that's our challenge, is the costs have gone up, but trying to figure out how we provide benefit to those sponsors to give us their money.
And that, I'd appreciate that. You've mentioned it in the past, but put it back to us in writing, just the request, particularly on that one. There's an ask that you've made, and I just wanted in writing from you, so we can go back and pursue with the DOT what limitations they may or might not have in temporary event planning and the use of some of their space for advertising.
Thank you, and I'll definitely reach out to Kate, so thank you.
All right, perfect. Susan Fisher, I see your hand raised. And you're muted. Susan?
Can you hear me?
I just did, but now you look like you're muted again. There you are.
How's that?
Good, perfect.
Okay, good, thank you. I'm having to do this on my phone, which I haven't done before. So thank you, Chairman Meskers. I was interested in going back to an earlier piece of the conversation and Peter Armstrong's observation about what are we offering people downtown, in addition to places to eat, increasingly expensive places to eat and places to shop. And that also connects, in my mind, with the whole question of walkability. If we're going to try to persuade people to walk into Mystic rather than drive to the front of the restaurant or the front of the store and park there and go in, if we're going to try to persuade people to walk to Mystic, then I think the coastal access pathway along the river bank becomes really important. And I realize that there are issues of property rights along that walkway. And the museum, Mystic Museum of Art, is we have said the only green space on our side of the river, that is a public amenity. I just think it would be worth looking at trying to connect a lovely walking path for families from open space to open space, and that might make individuals, families, anybody, it might make it easier to persuade people to walk into Mystic if there's a pleasant and lovely place that they can go on foot, which is not accessible by car, which is right along that riverbank, at least on our side of the river, the Groton side of the river. I would like to think even just showing a blue line path or some kind of indication, stronger wayfinding for the public access along the riverbank could possibly be helpful. And like I say, persuade people out of driving into Mystic, and be at least we talked about seasonal differences, in good weather, persuading them to take a bit of a pleasant walk instead. Thank you.
If there are studies related to that, the proposed pathways, if there's anything that's extant on that, it'd be helpful to see them with the group. And
Chairman, we have I've done one from our parking lot into town, working with some consultants to show what pathway could be done, including signage. And I remember, Susan, that there was one on your side because we wrote some signage for it I don't know whatever happened to it, but there was some discussions on that.
Unfortunately, I don't think that went anywhere, or at least I haven't heard anything further. And I do understand, as I say, that there are issues with private property ownership and people, residents not wanting to make their front yard a public pathway. But I would sure be interested in looking into that further because I think more could be done. Thank you.
Perfect. So if you happen to see those reports, or if you've got access to them, to forward them through the group to Patricia would be helpful, just with further consideration. Any other comments or thoughts from the group at this point? Tricia, where are we on the agenda? Keeping me honest as we move ahead.
The ever important other.
Chief Fasaro, any comments from you? Any thoughts at this point? Not to put you on the spot, but
sure. No, thanks, Chairman Mesker. I've just been kind of sitting back and listening. Yeah, a lot of thoughts and comments. I'll kind of tailor them a little bit. Good timing on this because the as we've already heard, the boat parade was this weekend. I think the estimate of 20,000 may be a bit conservative. Just based on some drone footage that we got. So just to explain what we did this weekend in concert with the Stonington Police Department, we dedicated a lot of resources. And yes, it's becoming increasingly expensive for us to support. In years past, we were able to do that with existing resources. And quite frankly, there wasn't the influx of people and vehicles as we see now. We can't do it with traditional staffing like we did in the past. So we've augmented our personnel from the department. Stonington did that as well. We had significant resources from the state police, both undercover, uniformed, out on the highway, as well as some of the emergency services unit to provide some resources that were a little bit more specialized that we can take advantage of in these types of scenarios. There were undercover officers as well, just to make sure that there weren't any problems. But I draw a distinction between Mystic on a special event like we had this weekend and Mystic every other weekend of the year. It's a persistent problem. Last night alone, at our town council meeting, I talked to a citizen who had a host of complaints about things that were happening in Mystic and how we, the police department, would address them. And I was frank with them and told them it's not just the police department that's going to be able to address those problems. So we've put more officers out. Every weekend, I now dedicate at least one extra patrol exclusively to the downtown Mystic area. And that's from Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights, early evening through bar closing. And every weekend there are, on my end of shift summary, there's some incidents that happen down there. And I'm not talking about violent crime. I'm talking about disturbances, DUIs. We've had a couple of fatal DUI accidents that have some connection to Mystic in the recent months. So the problem is a little bit more than just parking and all of these other things that we're talking about. And just to hit on parking very briefly, I can tell you just in the last 30 days, my department alone in Mystic has issued 193 tickets. West Main and Water Street, the predominance of it. So I've met with business owners. I've talked to some folks down there myself. There's some solutions, but I quite frankly don't know what those solutions are. Parking certainly is one of them. Identifying some areas where we could put cars. While I think it's maybe helpful to some extent using the seaport, but that's not what we're seeing. We're people that come to downtown Mystic that want to park in close proximity to the businesses and the restaurants and the things they're going to. So I think a solution that's more centered to the downtown area needs to be arrived at, and hopefully there's some funding that might help that. But what isn't captured in the comments that Bruce Flax made about the funding that the charging that we're having to do for police services on special events are the things that we're doing throughout the year. Now every weekend, it's an additional cost, and I know there isn't the ability for towns to garner any extra revenue in the form of sales tax and that sort of stuff. But I hope that would be something that might come out of this. Probably a heavy lift to do that, but it would help at least our two communities to try and offset some of the costs that the taxpayers of these towns are now funding for additional police services that we're that we're providing. So,
thank you. Probably it would be helpful if those centric parking solutions, we probably should have a conversation at some point about the thoughts on that with you and with the elected official to see whether there's anything we as a state can help with on that. I'm not sure, but I think the centric areas, it'll be interesting to see what potential there is there as well. So I think on it. Jim O'Donnell, any thoughts? You were pretty helpful the other day. Just what your thoughts are on this now, where we are.
Well, this is sort of out with much of this is out with my scope of experience. You know, I do live in neighborhoods that are impacted by the parking overspill. I think from Noack to some extent in Noack. But the only point I think is relevant is that when we're planning for use of space to accommodate parking, we should bear in mind that many of the attractions are in areas that are very flood vulnerable right now. And in the coming decades, you know, it's likely that those places are going to flood more frequently. And we should anticipate the need to move some facilities and some perhaps the capacity of the Mystic Seaport, you know, is very vulnerable. And I'm sure their planning's anticipating this already, but taking up space for parking now that might be better used in the future for a display space or some other activity is maybe unwise, and we should just bear that possibility in mind.
I appreciate that. Any other thoughts or comments from the group at this point? So for our next meeting, which is proposed to be December 18th, I would like us to, the group and the individuals as a whole, come back with some recommendations or thoughts about specific goals and objectives they'd like to see accomplished in the short term, in the long term. Again, focused again on residents, tourists, and workforce for both transport, parking, those solutions. Resiliency, what our long and short-term plans look like. I think we've discussed it at times, James. We've got to figure out how we begin to incorporate those into these plans. I think that other piece that we haven't highlighted or talked about, that would be helpful with, particularly with Chief Fazaro. Any conversations and thoughts between yourself and COG as well on event planning, on what supports you might need for some of those larger term events? Like, is the state consistently committed to this, or is this a request that comes in every year? How is it handled? Is it structural already? Do we need to make sure that that the standby support is there for any of the large events? And if you add events, are the resources available from the state, or are the resources available through COG, and for ancillary places for parking, for moving people around? What's our plan if the events continue to grow? How do we handle it? Mm-hmm. Those events may require more immediate planning within existing resources versus our thoughts about expanding resources to, which is where we've been sitting from day one. This is kind of an interesting conversation I'd love you to have. Sure. That might be yourself, Bruce, and Kate having that conversation, coming back to us with some thoughts on the special events.
Sure. I can tell you this, Representative Meskers, after we did an after-action review yesterday about the event, we're going to kind of change the way we do it next year. For those kind of events, we've done operations plans on both sides of the river. We've incorporated state police resources, but we're going to go to a unified command next year, where we really have one chain of command instead of breaking up across the river. And I forgot to mention this before, but we rarely do we use mutual aid officers. This year was the first time I requested some mutual aid officers. That's, I don't know that that's a viable option to use all the time, but for big special events like this, that is available.
And that may be the part of the conversation that needs to be fleshed out on your side.
Sure.
You know, as they think about planning, Bruce and Kate, you know, what is that a viable option? How do we do that? So I think we've chewed on a number of issues today. Any other comments or thoughts on today? Or should we draw this to a conclusion? I want to thank you all for showing up yet again. As I said, the next meeting, which I haven't confirmed with my co-chair, but I think the next meeting, which we're planning on the 18th, may be the last and the final meeting before we start putting pen to paper and start working on some of the recommendations coming out of the group. So it's important that your voices be heard, and I appreciate that. Thank you all. Any thoughts from my co-chair? You're muted.
Apologies. No, I think we'll settle on the date, and Tricia can get that out to everyone. But in terms of the information that you've requested, it's probably helpful if we have it in hand within a week.
Okay. So if you guys can put together the requests by during the course of this week, it would be very helpful. So we can sit and look at them and get ourselves organized for a final report. Okay. Well, I think that concludes our meeting. Then I want to thank you all for your participation.
Thank you.
Patrick, I see you just joined, but we just convened the meeting. I mean, we just ended the meeting.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you, though.
It is, it'll be available on YouTube and there'll be some minutes up shortly.
Awesome.
Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much. Have a great
Thank
day.
you. You too.